So as you just heard from Jeff Weiss, the census basically underpins redistricting, which can be one of the most political exercises that politicians engage in. So that's saying something. But a 2014 constitutional amendment was passed in New York that's supposed to make the process of redistricting a little more independent. Tomorrow, the legislature will be holding a joint legislative hearing to evaluate those changes. My next guest will co-chair that hearing. Deputy Senate Majority Leader Mike Gianaris is also the co-chair of LAT4, an acronym that will put you to sleep if I map it out for you. So that's why we use LAT4, and we're going to stick with it. Senator Gianaris, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for having me on.
So before this year, the state legislature drew district lines for its own members as well as for the state's congressional delegation. This time around, the districts will be drawn by this Redistricting Commission. How significant is that change?
Well, we don't know yet. This has never been done before. It was a process that many of us opposed at the time because it still does allow some of the old tricks to be utilized. One of the reasons we're having this hearing tomorrow is to take a look at this anew and think about whether there's anything we need to do to make changes before it's too late. Now, for example, when this process was established, the primaries were all in September, and now they're all in June, so the calendar doesn't work. That's laid out in the Constitution and in statute. So we know we have to make some changes just from a logistical point of view. And then the thought in conversations with some of the advocacy community and the good government groups was, if we're opening it up, let's tighten it up and make it as strong and as good a process as possible. And that's why we're having this hearing, to solicit input as to what that would mean.
So in 2014, I remember the good government groups had been very unhappy with the constitutional amendment because ultimately, as you mentioned, the legislature does get the last say on the new lines. But they do appear to be more supportive of the Senate Democrats and you and want to make a few changes. Are there some changes that you would consider making? I know that groups like the League of Women Voters want you to consider ensuring the commission has the staffing that it needs and that they want the two final commission members to be nominated pretty soon, and some of them to be Latino and women in particular.
Yeah, well, that's why we're having this hearing tomorrow, to hear not just from League of Women Voters. They will be certainly testifying, but we've got about a dozen witnesses who want to give us their ideas on how to make things better. Look, the process a decade ago was born of necessity. The Senate Democrats were not in charge back then, so we didn't have anything to say about what that product looked like. It was a political deal that enshrined another 10 years of gerrymandered lines. So it was what the Senate Republicans had agreed to get to the lines for the last decade that we've all been living under. So now that we have a shot at doing it better, we want to talk to some of the experts, people that have been following this for so long, and get their thoughts about what can we do in a very narrow window of time to make improvements so that the next round will be better than the last one.
Yeah, the timing is really weird, which is why I'm going to ask you this. Why didn't you decide to make these changes last year? I mean, what took you so long? If you're going to make a constitutional amendment, the timetable is super tight. You would have to pass, you would need first passage by, I think, the middle of August.
Yeah, that's correct. Last year or this year is irrelevant. It needs to be passed, any amendment needs to pass two separately elected legislatures. So last year and this year were the same legislature. Something would have to pass in that 1920 session, and then again in the 22 session, practically speaking, would have to be in 2021 to get on the ballot in November of 21, so that it would be in place for the 22 redistricting process. So we were deliberate about it. We're having a transparent public process with a hearing that is going to instruct our moves forward. But you're right. First passage of a constitutional amendment has to occur by August, so we've got a few weeks to work with.
So specifically, what's one thing that you would change about this constitutional amendment?
Well, look, we know we have to change the calendar. That's just as a starting point. There are things that were left in the Constitution that were date back decades, if not centuries, that are clearly unconstitutional right now, as it relates to how many senators are allotted to each county. These are, it used to be that the senators were allocated the way the U.S. Senate is, with a specific number for each county of the state. That's been ruled unconstitutional going back a very long time now because it violates the principle of one person, one vote. that language and language that is to that effect is still in the Constitution. So we have a lot of cleanup work to do to make sure that the Constitution itself is constitutional as it relates to the U.S. Constitution. And then there are other things that will allow us to tighten up the criteria for how these districts are determined. They didn't do enough work in that regard a decade ago, and that's, again, why we're having this hearing, to solicit input from the people that have been following it for so long to tell us exactly how to do that best.
So last question, Senator. Among the provisions of the new constitutional amendment is that the Redistricting Commission meet, I think, 12 times around the state public hearings. Can you leave us with a few reasons why our viewers should care about redistricting, which just saying redistricting puts a lot of people to sleep?
Yeah, I understand that, but it's incredibly important. If people are unhappy with the divisiveness and polarization of our politics, gerrymandering is at the top of the list of why that's happening. What's occurred is when the interested parties draw their own lines, they create safe seats on one end of the spectrum and the other. So you have very safe Republican seats. This is not just New York State. This is around the country right now. And you have very safe Democratic seats. And the people who represent those districts have very little incentive to appeal to the other side or appeal to the middle, because their view is, I've got a very extreme district here. It's protected. It's safe from challenge in November, and therefore I'm going to just advance my cause without regard to what a normal democratic process would allow. So if people aren't happy with that, if people want greater competition in the electoral process, we need lines that are fairer and not drawn for incumbency protection.
Right.
And that's why we needed to make the changes. We didn't make them a decade ago, unfortunately. The process that was set up to go forward has some corrections we can make, and that's what we're looking to do.
Deputy Senate Majority Leader and LAT4 co-chair Mike Gianaris, thank you again.
Thanks so much, Susan.